Right, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I am Juan Rivero, the chair of the Programs Committee of the City Club of New York, and I thank you for joining us tonight. The City Club is one of the oldest civic organizations in the city and has as its goals the promotion of sound urban policy and the protection of the city's essential character. In addition to our advocacy work on projects such as Penn Station and the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, we hold public programs such as this to shed light on some of the more momentous development issues happening in the city today. We're a volunteer organization and depend on our supporters' generous contributions to make this work possible. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation, no matter how small or how big. You can be certain that it will be put to good use, which is not to deny the thrill that humans have taken for thousands of years in staking money on uncertain outcomes. This practice has entertained multitudes, enriched a few, and ruined many. So, of course, a multi-billion-dollar industry has been built around it. And in a poetic turn of events, local economic development initiatives, which some cynics regard as a form of gambling itself, have been formulated with gambling operations as their centerpiece. And so this type of proposal has finally come to our doorstep here in New York City. 11 casino proposals were put forward for different New York City neighborhoods earlier in the year. Currently, only 4 remain in contention. And tonight, we're going to hear about them, but we're also going to hear about how to analyze these types of projects and about the effects that we might anticipate them having. And to do that, we are fortunate to be joined tonight by a fantastic set of panelists whom I will now introduce. Rachel Folberg is a research professor of epidemiology at the School of Public Health and Sciences of the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Rachel has for decades directed studies and advised governments and private sector organizations on issues related to gambling legalization, the epidemiology of problem gambling, and the social and economic impacts of casinos. Brent Ryan is Vice Provost and Professor of Urban Design and Public Policy at MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning. Brent's research focuses on the aesthetics and policies of contemporary urban design, and he has looked at the impacts of mega projects such as casinos and convention centers on surrounding urban fabric. Tom Corcoran is a doctoral candidate at the Department of Sociology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and his research analyzes the politics of coalition formation and stakeholder negotiation in connection to the construction of casinos in urban settings. And Greg Smith-Simon is director of the Center for the Study of Brooklyn and professor of sociology at Brooklyn College and the Graduate Center at CUNY. Greg studies community conflict over urban development projects and has also conducted research on casino operations and the relation between casinos and their customers. And last but not least, John Shapiro is professor at Pratt's Graduate Center for Planning and the Environment, and before that was a principal at Phillips Price Shapiro Associates, one of the leading planning consulting firms in the region. Currently, John is co-chair of the City Club's Waterfront Committee, and on top of all that, he's our friend, and he will be moderating our evening tonight. First, John will set the stage for our discussion. Then we will hear from our panelists, and then John will lead a conversation with them. After that, he will moderate a discussion using questions from the audience, so please feel free to submit questions or comments through the Q&A function at the bottom at any time. And with that, I leave you in John's able hands.
Hi. Hey, everyone. So I have a little bit of background in casinos, having looked at their economic impacts for both Connecticut, the Mohawk Casino, and the Atlantic City casinos. And Juan asked me to do this in particular because I know all the sites very well. And in that regard, I want to thank Juan for putting this whole thing together. He's been working on it for some time and finding the exact right experts around the nation, 3 from Massachusetts and 1 from New York. I also want to thank Max, who on my screen is on my left. Max is a grad student at Pratt Institute, and he did the fact sheets that I'll be showing in a few minutes on each of the remaining contenders, as well as a first draft of a matrix that compares the sites. So timing is everything. There are 3 licenses for casinos in Southern New York, including but not limited to New York City. The applications were due this past June. The process includes an appointed citizen advisory committee with the appointees picked by the governor, the mayor, and the local state representatives, uh, which gives a yes, no vote. And out of all the contenders, only four are left, all the Manhattan sites and Coney Island sites. The CAC said, no way, we're not interested. Those votes were due September 30th. By December 1st, the New York State Gaming Review Board will make its final decision. So reason I said timing is perfect is because this is our chance to think really hard about which of these sites, uh, if any, should go forward from our perspective. That is, from the perspective of the city of New York or the citizens of New York, and likewise Yonkers. So let me pull up the fact sheets so that you get an idea of what we're talking about. Whoops. So the first site to highlight, let me make this a bit larger. Sorry, guys. Is the site at Willets Point next to the Mets Stadium. This is proposed by Steve Cohen and Hard Rock International, who would do the hotels. Includes some park features connecting the waterfront to Flushing Meadow Corona Park, which, for those of you who don't know Queens, it's the Central Park of Queens with 9 million visitors a year. So the basic facts are it's close to 4 million on a portion of 78 acres and is one of the bigger proposals. It got full CAC support. However, the local community, including advocates for the park, call themselves the Fed Up Coalition, and they've put forward an alternative plan for making the entire area, which is now a parking lot for the stadium, making the entire area into a park with the parking underneath. The second proposal is also in Queens, further south, next to the Shore Parkway, and it's at Aqueduct Raceway. And it's basically a tightly formed development that abuts the raceway itself, which would, it's not clear would remain or not, because the current plan is that the raceway goes someplace else. It's it's largely about slot machines. And one advantage of this site is it already has gambling there. The third site is Bally's Bronx, which is at what we all think of as the Trump golf course at the Whitestone Bridge. Also excellent highway access. Whereas there's excellent transit, both Long Island Railroad and the 7 subway line going to Metro Park. There's no transit. I'm sorry, there's no transit at the Bailey's Bronx site, except by shuttle bus or shuttle service to a nearby ferry stop at Ferry Point, and very limited transit to the Aqueduct site. The last site that's up for consideration is MGM Empire City at Yonkers Raceway, which abuts the New York State Thruway and is just south of the Cross County Shopping Center. So it's not in the downtown Yonkers waterfront, which a lot of us think of, oh, that's Yonkers. It's inland where the highways are. All four sites have excellent highway access. The best highway access is to the Metro Park, which is surrounded by highways, right? All the highways that basically go to JFK. So those are the four basic sites. These fact sheets will be available via the City Club website and will also be sent to everyone who got an invitation to attend the panel. And in addition to the fact sheets, as I said, we have a matrix. Whoops. Um, oh, we'll get to that later. We have a, I must have erased it. I must have closed it. We have a matrix that compares the site. Max, during the course of the panel, will add to that matrix based on things that are brought up by the panelists. The emphasis of this, we'll be talking about the economic impacts, but the emphasis, as I said, is going to be on the non-economic impacts. And there's a reason for that. The gaming board, in 80% of their criteria, is biased towards the largest casino proposal, because 70% is about how much money is being spent on it, the number of jobs, and the amount of state revenue that's being created. And then another 20% is about local hiring, local businesses, minority businesses. In other words, that there's secondary benefits as you nuance how the dollars are spent in creating the casino and operating it. So everything else is not is not being considered by the board. So if there is something else in play, like alienation of park, social impacts on neighbors, urban design impacts, that's for us to bring up and bring forward. That criteria, you may realize, is largely about thinking of this as a base industry for the state. That is, how many tourists do you bring in? And it's really about deciding between, should it go in the northern Catskills or the southern Catskills, or in eastern upstate New York or western upstate New York. When you start to look at 3 sites in one city and one site, just one exit north of the city, you begin to think about the nuances, what to the state gaming board would think of as nuances, but to us become highly important. And on that basis, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists. I think, Rachel, you're going first.
Okay, well, thank you, John. I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion, and I'd like to thank the City Club of New York for pulling this all together. I do have to start. The University of Massachusetts requires me to do this every time I do a public appearance discussing my work in Massachusetts. The university requires me to confess that in addition to the work that I do for the Gaming Commission in Massachusetts, I also have a consulting business, which I've had for about 30 years, that does work very similar to what I do for the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. So that's my conflict of interest disclosure. I've been asked to address the possible economic and social impacts of these various proposals that are under consideration. And I want to just start by saying that historically, our understanding of the social and economic impacts of gambling has been beset by methodological issues and problems. And there has been, until quite recently, very little consensus on what to measure, how to measure it, and how to combine the economic and the social pieces. But in 2011, a group called the Canadian Consortium for Gambling Research commissioned a comprehensive review of all of the gambling impact research that had been done since the 1970s, with the goal to document what was known about impacts and to propose a theoretical framework for analyzing those impacts going forward. I won't go into the details of what the researchers did, except to say that they reviewed 492 studies. They found that only 7 of them were deemed to have excellent methodology, and they proposed an approach, a theoretical framework that I actually have been using in my work in Massachusetts since I started my project in 2013. So the theoretical framework basically proposes that one measure impacts rather than costs and benefits, that a profile of impacts be created rather than combining them into a single aggregate value, that micro or community impacts be investigated as well as macro or regional impacts, The old saying, follow the money, identify where the money is coming from, who's gambling at the venue, for example, and where it's going, who's making the money. And then utilizing multiple sources of information for triangulation, and importantly, comparing changes in the host communities to those observed in matched control communities. So rather than go into a lot of details of what the proposals in front of us include, I just want to sort of highlight that the social impacts typically that are included in the theoretical framework include problem gambling and related indices, crime, changes in attitudes towards gambling, potential changes in population health, including leisure involvement, demographic changes, and environmental impacts. On the economic side, it's important to look at spending and revenues at the venues, also changes in the number and types of business establishments in the local environment, employment levels, especially local labor force participation, personal income, real estate and housing, and government and fiscal costs. So, as I said, we've been doing this work in Massachusetts since 2013. And some of the things that we've learned from the Massachusetts situation is that you need ongoing monitoring of the social and economic impacts, since these change over time and in response to larger social and economic trends. For instance, in Massachusetts, the third and largest casino in the Boston area actually opened just a few months before COVID-19 hit all of our lives. And it resulted in some very unusual sort of impacts of that very large casino in the wake of the pandemic. But this type of monitoring is important because it allows for early interventions by the regulator and by policymakers to ensure that harms are minimized and mitigated. Another critical piece is that operators need to be required to provide data to the regulator to allow for this ongoing monitoring. It's not something that most casino companies are experienced doing. Certainly, it took the regulator in Massachusetts quite a long time to come up with an arrangement that would work. But it's been very important in our success in Massachusetts in basically being able to ensure that the positive impacts are maximized and the negative impacts are either minimized or mitigated. How am I doing on time? I have a few more things to say. I'm not sure what the New York State Gaming Commission has the leverage to require operators to do. I would recommend that they look at local hiring and local spending to maximize those economic impacts or benefits. That the operators be required to provide the Gaming Commission with data to monitor employment and vendor spending to make sure that they achieve the goals that they have promised to meet. One of the interesting things about many large economic developments is that the operator or the developer makes a lot of promises, and then no one goes back to find out if they actually kept their promises. I think I will close my remarks there and turn it back over to John. John?
I don't know where John is, but Brent, you're next. So if you could just take over from Rachel, please.
Of course, happy to do so. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to be here tonight and for the opportunity to weigh in on the urban design of casinos, which I don't often get asked to do. It's clear that casino proposals are quite complex. They involve a lot of different considerations. We'll get to many of those tonight, including economic development, revenue, profit, public policy, labor markets, environmental impacts. Urban design, in my experience, is typically almost never the variable that determines the format of these projects. And there are reasons for that. It's not that urban design doesn't matter. It's not that the parties involved are ignorant of, unaware of, or don't care about urban design, but it's because the development format demands of casinos are pretty inflexible, and they mitigate against any flexibility in their urban design. So what do I mean by this? I'll speak briefly about 4 urban design elements that in my experience are pretty invariant with casinos. This means you can't do much about these urban design elements. And then I'll discuss a couple of urban design elements where the government or the community regulators might have more flexibility and where they're almost obligated to act because they don't have flexibility with the elements that I'm going to speak about. I'm drawing from my experience of casinos in the US, a couple in Canada as well, but in particular in Detroit and Philadelphia, cities where I've worked extensively and that have casinos. And their casinos are in high intensity urban locations. They're analogous but not identical to those in New York State. So if you want to write down 4 urban design keywords, I'll give them to you now, and then I'll speak about them. The first is that casinos are extremely bulky. The second is that they're extremely hermetic, which means they're closed to the outside. The third is that they're extremely auto-centered. And the fourth is that casinos are extremely expansionist. So what you see is never what you get after a couple of years. Each of these casino urban design aspects has damaging impacts on urban design. I'll be blunt. And I can guarantee you that if a casino sponsor or booster says these aren't true, they're not being honest with you. They are true, and they're always true. So the negative urban design impacts of casinos exist, and they tend to increase over time. So let's dig into this. Bulky. Casinos involve a lot of square feet, and this is because casinos are typically not just a gaming floor, but they have adjacent spaces, and you can look at casino floor plans. They're always diagrammatic. They never tell you exactly what's going on. And there are spaces like poker rooms, high limit areas, restaurants, many restaurants, quite often hotel, event center, which is a conference center, meeting rooms, and of course the myriad and typically undisclosed and undiagrammed service areas that are required for the casino to operate. And casinos, make no mistake, are extremely secretive about their designs for obvious reasons. But you're getting a big building with a casino. And even if there's no hotel, such as the Rivers Casino in Philadelphia, I measured the building. Crudely, it's about 500 by 500 feet minimum. It's about 5 stories high. It's about 100 feet in elevation. So that's about 250,000 gross square feet per floor. It's not the gaming space, it's the gross square feet, even if the gambling floor will be smaller. So these are minimum dimensions for casinos, and this does not include the parking, which I'll get to in a second. So you're talking about a building, in any case, you're talking about a building that's the size of at least a small convention center or shopping mall scale structure. Again, this is before you get to parking. Hermetic. Casinos are closed to the outside, and this is where they really conflict with urban design best practices. Urban design typically emphasizes engagement between the public and private realms. If you think of New York's recent urban design, closing Broadway, the High Line, shops that face out onto the street, housing with a public presence, safe and pleasant pedestrian environments. These are urban design best practices. Casinos don't conform to this ideal, of course, because they can't. Their business model requires that the gambler be inside, self-contained environment with no visual cues, right? No visual cues. This is to promote your extended time in the casino and to enhance the casino's profits. So design matters very much to casino designers. Remember, the casinos are focused on profit for the operator. And casino adjacent facilities are typically windowless, such as event centers, meeting rooms, etc. Just like a convention center is. Casinos are not the only windowless large buildings that we put in cities. I'll get to that in a second. So make no mistake, a casino is bulky, but it's also a windowless box of a building. Auto orientation. This is the most challenging urban design issue. They require a lot, and I mean a lot of parking, a lot of parking. A typical figure that I found is around 3,000 parking spaces for a casino. And the idea, of course, is the parking has to be free. There's always enough, and that it's not inconvenient. This is to maximize the business model. Unfortunately for cities, this means that considerations that cities are typically broadcasting, such as sustainability, promoting transit, minimizing traffic, promoting pedestrians, mostly goes out the window. Most casinos are not mass transit oriented, and that's New York can potentially break that model, which would be truly revolutionary. The casino business model demands these massive parking garages. They occur in every case and easy auto access. The Rivers Casino parking garage in Philadelphia, it's 8 stories high. It's actually higher than the casino, and it's a 300 by 300 foot in dimension box, larger than a New York City block. Lastly, expansionism. The casino you start with is not the casino you end up with. They always expand, always. Why? Even if the original agreement says we promise we won't, they do. Because the casino is a business. The business model is an evolution, and the profit incentive is therefore also an evolution. Expansions might take a few years. Boston is currently investigating an expansion. I wasn't surprised to learn this. So is Philadelphia. What do casinos want to add? Why would they do this? Well, the business model needs to survive. Sports betting facilities is now the thing to compete with the online gaming. Hotels, or maybe additional hotels to keep casino patrons around. More gambling floors, more parking, more meeting facilities. It's a relentless pressure to expand. So once you start with the casino, it's not what you end up with. And I've written about that in the past. Okay, so these are the negative urban design features you can't do anything about. But there are 2 urban design features you can do something about. And the first is location. And I'll emphasize location, location, location. Public officials should pay extremely careful attention to location. I believe that casinos are best in locations that are convenient yet isolated. And my favorite is Montreal. I love the city of Montreal. And I love that they put their casino out on a river island that already had large buildings. You can't even see it from the downtown. And yet it's convenient on the highway. It doesn't have good transit access. Most analogous location in New York would actually be Randall's Island, which surprised that didn't come up. I like that. I actually like that location for a casino. The second area where the public sector has some leverage is open space. And casinos typically do a very poor job with this. Of course, they negotiate it down to a minimum. Philly's casinos crammed up against the Delaware River with a very poor quality sliver of open space. And Boston's, which is really in Everett, they did a little better, but there's still a lot of driveways along the waterfront. So the waterfront's a little bit bigger. Boston negotiated slightly better. And open space in New York is extremely costly. And we see the Brooklyn Bridge Park model where we need private development to finance it. So a casino might provide very valuable open space for the public. In closing, you might think I don't like casinos. I actually do like them, and I patronize them myself from time to time. I don't think they fit well into dense urban context. I just don't. Of course, they don't fit well into cities. They're an urban design blight most of the time in urban locations. But we have the opportunity to put casinos in convenient and isolated locations. We should take that opportunity. Unfortunately, we tend to put them on waterfronts in American cities because this is where we have available land. And I'm glad that we've eliminated some key waterfront sites in New York. So in short, the pressure to build casinos is inexorable, and their urban design impacts are typically negative, but there are some areas for flexibility. And I close here. Thank you.
Thank you. The problem before was I'm clumsy when hitting the right button, so I apologize earlier. Thomas, I think you're next.
Yes, I am. Okay, good evening. I want to say thank you so much to the City Club for inviting me to participate in this fantastic panel. As a sociologist, I apply social theories and concepts to real-world social issues and problems. However, more specifically, I'm an ethnographer. So in its simplest terms, this means I talk and spend very long periods of time with people in the places where they reside or work, often to understand some type of social phenomenon, practice, or thing. In Springfield, Massachusetts, a majority Black and brown medium-sized city, about 160,000 residents, a city that's experienced deindustrialization, disinvestment, and increases in poverty, I've ethnographically studied and continue to study the construction of a casino erected in the city's downtown in 2018. So as we've already been discussing, casinos are controversial development projects. They raise concerns over their potential negative effects on community health, quality of life, as well as sustainability for the use of urban space. So given these negative connotations surrounding casinos and casino gambling, question that I'm asking is, how do casino firms or corporations sell themselves to communities, and what does the implementation process look like on the ground? Drawing from some of my ethnographic research in Springfield, I'll address how casinos obtain what some might call buy-in to communities. That is, what agreements do they negotiate with communities? What do they promise to communities? And how does this process play out? So during the summer of 2013, 2 years before I arrived to live in Western Massachusetts to begin my doctorate studies, previously I lived in Queens, New York, MGM Resorts International was awarded a contract to build a resort-style casino in the city's downtown. And this came after the passing of the Massachusetts Expanded Gaming Act that was ratified in November 2011. So now there's a lot of backstory as to how this casino ended up in this particular location in the city, so in an urban context, as well as how MGM was selected over the 3 other multinational casino firms that were competing for casino contracts or licenses in the city, but also in some adjacent communities. But I think for time purposes, I won't be able to get into these details, but if it's relevant for the Q&A, I'd be more than happy to discuss. So as I started this ethnographic research in 2015, wasn't from the city, so I started to go to public forums and meetings to find people who'd either interacted with MGM or were involved in some of the campaigns in support of the casino, or those who were involved in campaigns against the casino. And very soon I learned, in the period leading up to obtain the contract, MGM had donated significant amounts of money through their foundation to large, but also small nonprofits throughout the city, of which there's several. So this ranged from large organizations like the United Way, Chamber of Commerce, a local civic culture association, some area community colleges, but also smaller organizations like neighborhood councils, ethnic cultural clubs, and social service agencies who plan to partner with the company during the hiring process before and after construction was complete. So the people that I spoke with would often cite how MGM CEOs, so CEOs from Las Vegas themselves, would try to embed themselves in civic life in the city. So, for example, one respondent who worked for a large non-city profit told me in my research, they were literally everywhere. They went to community breakfasts, block parties, neighborhood meetings. They frequented local restaurants, coffee shops. They were kissing babies, for God's sakes, all to sell this thing to us. And as I've noted, MGM was quick to sponsor several of these events and places because they wanted to be seen as a good community partner, and what they often used this term, the engine to spark economic development for the city. So there was also a host community agreement. Sometimes people refer to them as community benefits agreements that was negotiated between the city and the firm. And the contract was primarily brokered between the mayor and some officers in his cabinet, so people like the chief assistant financial officer. But I think importantly, the community input or participation was very limited in this process, I think, which might, is important to focus on and think about for the Q&A. Again, there's too many details to go through the entire HCA in my allotted time, but I'll just mention a few things. So up front, there's about a $15 million payment that MGM made to the city, things like payment in lieu of taxes, improvements to a riverfront park, direct community impact funds that went to police, fire, and schools and other infrastructure broadly construed, as well as a company-sponsored pavilion that would be constructed at a city-owned golf course. And then in addition to upfront payments, there were, of course, projected annual payments that were designated in the HCA, some of them contingent upon percentages of annual gambling gross revenue. And among these items, there was a general fund for things like early childhood education, higher education, libraries, and community health impacts. However, the extent to which these promises and the payments have been fulfilled continues to be heavily debated within the community. And then in terms of the actual infrastructure of the project, MGM agreed to build a 125,000 square foot casino with 3,000 slot machines, as well as a 250 room, 7,000 square foot hotel tower that importantly to note, after obtaining the contract, they changed this tower design and built this like flat story. I think it had the same square footage and the number of rooms, but it created this tremendous public uproar because the city was sold on these renditions of a tower and the skyline. Now I know you're all, most of you in New York, and seeing a skyscraper come out of the ground, it's like a daily occurrence, but not so much in this city. And people really hurt when these plans changed, and they kind of saw it as an omen that things were maybe not going to go good. And then finally, MGM agreed to build a residential space with 54 market rate apartments about 2 blocks from the casino. And this is a project that's inched along very slowly since its opening in 2018. I think it's currently under construction, but still yet to be completed. So as I mentioned, there's a lot more discussed in this particular case, as well as how it might apply to the current proposals in New York City. However, I'll defer to our Q&A portion of the forum for further conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And Greg, as a fellow New Yorker, you're the sweep.
Thank you so much, John. And thanks to everybody for attending and to my fellow panelists whose presentations have really been insightful and thoughtful, and I appreciate that quite a lot. I want to talk about casinos. In the US, there are today about 2,000 casinos. In New York State, there are about 25, concentrated in particular on the I-90 corridor between Buffalo and the Great Lakes to North Albany in the middle of the state. In the New York metro area, there are 3 or 5, depending on how you count it. There's the Empire at Yonkers, there's Resorts World at Aqueduct, there's Jake's 58 on Long Island, and arguably Resorts World in Newburgh and Resorts World in Monticello, New York, that are about 2 hours north of here. I mention this because the casinos that we're thinking about are not Las Vegas. With 2,000 casinos across the country, you don't create a destination casino. These are regional casinos. They're not a tourist draw. Now, how do regional casinos make money? Well, 80% of the revenue is in slot machines. So what you do as a casino manager, you get local gamblers to come 7 days a week, if possible, to play slot machines. New York City slot machines have a 93 to 94% payback, which is good for the average. So you put 100 $1 bills in, you should get about 93 or 94 of them back. The issue is that you then put those 93 in and slowly depreciate as you rebet. What the casinos do, therefore, is they tier the players by value, by how much they spend, and then they provide tiered benefits, like cutting the line or getting your car parked by a valet or getting better seats at a concert. And you then send daily promotions that are tiered and rapidly expiring for everything from a fleece blanket or $20 off a steak dinner to an occasional hotel room. All that matters are slot machines, and therefore, when you look at the plans, the restaurants, the bars, the concert venues, and the hotel are not independent profit centers. They're a means to create tiered benefits for regular customers. A ticket to a concert costs the casino less than the steak dinner does. So they're not hoping that someone will come for dinner and stay to gamble. It's a way to make sure their gamblers eat dinner. Who are the regulars? In my qualitative observations, this is not quantitative work, they generally have money, but not from Ivy League kind of sources of money. If I can give you a sort of gendered example, think about a husband and wife. The husband's built a successful HVAC contracting business. He made money taking risks, taking on big jobs, buying expensive new equipment, or trying out untested suppliers. And in this gendered example, she managed the financial insecurity in the early years, juggling overdue bills, saving money from clip coupons, like you do when those promotions come and you hold on to those promotions as well. What casinos do for customers is create financial risk that is real with controlled wagers. And it means that you're putting money on the line to find a deal or an angle on the casino promotions as well. And what that means is that, in my observation from talking to an awful lot of gamblers and getting a sense of how casinos operate, gamblers don't gamble to win. That's not the emotionally meaningful experience. You're playing that slot machine for the moment of worry when you're risking something and about to push the button. The meaningful experience isn't winning, but risk. Gamblers in the United States are educated. In a lot of markets, the payback percentages or hold percentages are published, and they know them. They choose casinos knowing what the whole percentage is, and they may choose one that keeps a little more money, but has a nicer interior, or was more recently renovated, or gives them better goodies. So for that substantial $40 to $50 a night, that might be close to $20,000 a year, they get an evening's entertainment, personalized tiered customer service, food, drink, hotel rooms, and concerts. And the tiering, meanwhile, lets them, people in higher tiers, know they're getting something special, while making everybody else envy and hope that they can climb up to that level as well. So some quick recommendations that come out of those observations. I want to admit up front that I don't love casinos. And it is, as Clifford Geertz suggested in Notes on a Balinese Cockfight, for those of you that took anthropology classes, it's an almost aesthetic objection. My recommendations would be this, therefore. Permit the 2 existing casinos. They're already there, and if you don't like them, you didn't even notice that Yonkers and Aqueduct have casinos. They have 4,000 slot machines. The one that Tom was just talking about, the brand new one for MGM up in New England, is talking about 3,000. They'll expand to about 6,000 or 7,000. I can't imagine them getting bigger than that. Then there's a third one, and I want to suggest to the audience that you have a choice. It's good that we have a choice, because the third one is positioned between Aqueduct and Yonkers. And the competition will give customers a better experience, because the people who drive can choose between one of those existing casinos and the other one. Your choices are this, I would suggest. You could go green. The Hard Rock in Queens is green because it's near transit, so you'll reduce the gasoline that people burn to get there. Or you can go social justice, because Bailey's is poorly served by transit, so you need the money to be able to drive there. And driving plus the toll on the Whitestone Bridge, which deters people from making that trip, will reduce the enthusiasm or ability for people without cars to get there. I'd suggest that I don't think that we should evaluate proposals by their profitability, because we don't have the tools to do that, and that's the job of the casinos. So I'm not worried about whether the proposals will best position them for profitability or make too many of them to compete against each other. Nor, I think, should we try to maximize tax revenue by trying to maximize the number of gamblers or increase the amount that they spend. New York State has decided to allow casinos, and we already have them. We can let people gamble, but we don't need to try to induce them. The last thing I would say about the 2 final proposals are that they're in low elevation areas. And the City Club has argued recently that we should not be building in low-lying areas because of sea level rise. I agree. But if the city is going to permit building in vulnerable areas, we should build things there that are expendable, like casinos instead of housing. Thanks a lot.
Wow, I love that last provocation, and we're going to return to it. But I'm going to open up with a question to all 4 of you. It's actually a question that's implied from Jocelyn Garcia Polino, which is, should we get a casino at all? Or should we be in favor of a casino at all in New York City or Yonkers? And, let's start out with a simple yes, no, that's my opinion, no, or depends. So just quickly do a round. What do you each say? And then I want to hear from the people who say it depends.
I'll say it depends.
I will also say it depends.
And I'm also depends.
And Greg?
I will say we already have them, and we're probably going to get another.
Which is a way of saying it depends, because if we're going to get another, it depends on where it goes and what it is. All right. In that case, let's start with Brent, Rachel, Thomas, Greg, sweep at the end. Why you say it depends, and what is the primary 1 or 2 things that it depends on?
So I'll speak purely from the urban design perspective, the impact on the built environment, and say that if a casino is in as I noted before, a convenient yet isolated location, the negative urban design qualities of the casino, the bulky windowless building, the large parking, and I'm now looking at the Springfield project and noting exactly those problems about the project. They're much less They will exist nevertheless, but they will exist. They won't trouble the surroundings, and there won't be as much of a visual blight on the surroundings as they would if they're located in the middle of a dense urban environment. And that's why I'll say it depends.
So my take on this, and believe me, I am a neutral person when it comes to gambling. I'm not a gambler myself. I've just somehow managed to find myself researching it for the last 40 years. And my sense of that it depends is balanced on the sort of narrow point of how are you going to create a viable gambling industry, or maintain a viable gambling industry in New York City, but at the same time minimizing and mitigating the very real problems that will definitely come along. And there are communities of immigrants, there are communities of young people, there are groups in the population that are more vulnerable than other groups to experiencing gambling related harm. And I think it behooves the operators and the regulator and the communities to take those concerns into consideration and make sure that those concerns are weigh as heavily in the decision as the decision to make a profit.
Thomas?
Yes, thank you. I would say, it depends on these types of agreements that might be made between, the casino firms themselves and the communities, and how that can be used to, as we're saying, mitigate some of the, the social harms, but at the same time, can provide some leverage for the communities themselves to negotiate with these, these powerful corporations. To and I don't want to say something as kitschy as bring people together, but create these types of, there's a lot of groups that come to the table and stakeholders that come to the table, and I think that there's a lot of power in negotiating these types of developments that can create some reasonable meaning for communities, regardless of the the harms and effects. But with that said, I also think that there has to be a lot of communication and dialogue between the scales of things, like Professor Volberg, she talks about the Gaming Commission, there's meetings that the Gaming Commission has, stakeholders come to these meetings, so this dialogue is constantly going on. And then we have this type of due process that's thinking about, because these are changing, as Brent is also saying, these are changing all the time in terms of their design. So I think that there's something reasonable in thinking about those things. And that's why I'd say it depends. It's not just this structure that falls from the sky. There's debate and some deliberation that's very meaningful, I think, that goes on for these projects. They're controversial.
Mm.
I'll mention to people that when we were getting ready for this panel earlier in the evening, we were throwing around cultural references. And I think I'm the person here who's the how I learned to stop worrying and learn to love the bomb. Unlike Brent, I'm not a gambler, and yet, I'm ready to open the bay doors. I really appreciate what Rachel and Tom are saying. Rachel about the risks, Tom about the need to try to maximize the community benefits, essentially. And to Brent's point, I'm relieved that we didn't waste immense amounts of valuable Manhattan real estate to create something that's economically a dead end. It doesn't produce anything other than steak dinners. In particular, thinking about that space also, there are dead spaces also in that a lot of times if you visit casinos around the country, they have these weird vestigial arms. I've been to riverboat casinos that's a riverboat in a concrete basin next to a river. I was at one that was a dog track casino, and it took me 15 minutes following little tiny arrows to find a dog track. There was nobody there, and there were just dogs running around in a circle. The racetracks, I think, at Yonkers and Aqueduct are on the way out. You make more money from the casinos in a single horse stable than you do in the entire racetrack, I suspect, square foot for square foot. So the space is a real problem. I would mention all all three of the casinos that are closest to us, Aqueduct, Yonkers, and Jake's 58, which I haven't been to, are unionized. They're probably somewhere just below. I mean, they're talking about unionized construction, but they're somewhat akin to like a unionized convention hotel job. These are good unionized working class jobs that people in a lot of markets keep for a long time. And an economy that has mostly disposable service industry jobs, that's something to pay attention to. In terms of the worry, I want to just add one other little thing to Rachel's discussion of harms. There's been recent observations that people taking certain classes of prescription drugs, dopamine antagonists used for Parkinson's and other sorts of disorders, can suddenly find themselves much more induced to gamble. And my sense is that that's something that the sort of got a problem, call 1-800-GAMBLING sort of weak efforts to control problem gambling haven't looked at very closely. Maybe something that we want to pay attention to. I mention all that because I don't have a lot of the what ifs, because we've already got two gigantic casinos. You know, they've got 4,500 slot machines apiece or electronic terminals. That puts them in the top upper tier of casinos nationwide. We just haven't noticed. You know, whether we are off at a third at a former landfill golf course or a flooding park worries me less than other development questions more central to the city's growth.
So I'm going to start asking follow-up questions to what you all said, either before or now. So Rachel, and this actually comes a question from Jeff Weiner. What mitigation measures should be required to battle the negative public health impacts?
I'm going to say mandatory pre-commitment, which is requiring people before they start to gamble to set a budget and in terms of both money and time, and to hopefully, although this isn't always done, cut people off when they reach their limit. It's not a very popular idea in the industry, but it has proven effective in other jurisdictions internationally. And even if it was a voluntary pre-commitment program, if you made it an opt-out program rather than an opt-in, that is, people were offered it, they didn't have to say, oh, I have a gambling problem, so I need to commit myself to something. But just, you know, an ordinary part of going to a casino should be deciding ahead of time how much you want to spend or lose and how much time you want to spend there. And then when you reach those limits, basically that's your entertainment for the evening.
And Rachel and Brent, following up mainly on things that you've said, Rachel, but Brent, you touched on this too. 3 of the sites are located next to moderate low-income neighborhoods. One of them in particular is next to 2 immigrant neighborhoods, one of which is Chinese. Does that affect your thinking about location?
In a sense, it does. It depends what the proximity of it is. So I mean, you could say the same for a Randall's Island. If across the water you have, low-income neighborhoods, although it's spatially separated from them. I think if a casino is directly adjacent, then it's a kind of an environmental justice issue with respect to the auto traffic, the negative visual impacts, et cetera. Again, I'm sticking only to the urban design variables because that's my expertise area here. So yes, but I'd say the more separation from any residential areas, the better.
That's super interesting. The only site that is cheek by jowl with residential are the 2 raceway sites.
They are.
Okay.
Those would not be my favorite sites.
Interesting enough that there's a rumor that they're the favorite sites of the state because they already have gambling licenses. And they can start, all they have to do is expand, as opposed to the other sites will take longer to develop.
My argument would be if you want to leverage park space and you want some prayer of having some fraction of people use mass transit, then the Flushing Meadows Park site has some advantages.
Now, in terms of park opportunity cost, whether that's for parks or for housing. So, for example, Brad Lander, our controller, has suggested that golf courses like the one at Bailey's provide good opportunity for a combined park and housing development. And who needs golf courses anymore? Uh, or at least in comparison to the other things that might be done in the site. Does anyone have a comment on that? Particularly you, Brent, as a planner, urban designer, but I open it up to everyone.
To me, it depends who owns that golf course. If it's a private golf course, it's an entirely different consideration. If this is a private golf course, I think we're
Public
speaking.
golf course curiosity is, in order for the project to go forward, I think Donald Trump gets $70 million because he's the leaseholder.
I will abstain from commenting on that, but I have an opinion. I would say that this site is the worst location because it does not have any transit access.
And neither does the Yonkers site.
Correct, it does not, but that's also adjacent to residential. So that's a double negative against Yonkers in my urban design book anyway.
John,
Got it.
and you know about golf courses, I think it's telling that Brad suggested that as a colleague and an ally, but he's also who got really excited about building a bunch of housing next to the Gowanus Canal. The courses and the Aqueduct racetrack are in flood zones. Building housing
Yes.
there is a short-sighted mistake because you're going to have to dislocate everybody there at some point in the future. You know, use the cemeteries along the Jackie Robinson. Those are 100 feet above sea level. I would say that the sites we're looking at are poor choices for housing. They're only gonna put vulnerable risk when the day comes.
So I'm going to ask a provocative question then of you, Greg. Notwithstanding that I was the primary author of that City Club policy saying don't develop in neighborhoods that are going to be submerged by high tide without a plan, and further inland where the flood zone is going to go without the proper regulations that we now give to the existing flood zone. Having said that, is it possible that each of these casinos and flood zones can become a cash cow for all the maintenance stuff that goes into protecting, the bill to maintain the walls that they talk about? No one yet has a solution for how we maintain all the green infrastructure that seems to be the most popular thing to do for stormwater, at least.
I would say pretty certainly, and Atlantic City is a great example of this because it's on the waterfront. As you know, companies don't pay for their own seawalls. If they're there, they're going to induce the city, the state, or the feds to pay for it. It's a gamble. Remember too that these casinos are peculiar. They're making big investments at a moment when online gambling and sports betting has become really popular. It is, in my mind, the economic equivalent of building a gigantic multiplex movie theater in the age of Netflix. I'm not sure that people will come to these casinos. So to your point, John, when the day comes, I went down to Atlantic City and I witnessed the demolition of the bankrupt Trump casino. I think we'll see more of those implosions. I'll mention, by the way, in terms of contractors, that the audience was filled with white South Jersey contractors who were Republican leaning and would have been Trump fans, and they hated him for a person because the story that got told in Atlantic City was that when that thing got built, rather than hire big contractors for a big job, he hired a whole bunch of small operators, gave them the biggest job of their life, for which they went deeply in debt. And every single contractor told me the story that morning. Then he just didn't pay them. So I think that's a particular operator. But the point to Rachel's points about local sourcing, you want to be careful and make sure that the business deals don't end up hurting the people they're intended to help. Most of these companies are much more corporate and don't operate that way. But you want to think about that. So yeah, I would say my guess is that we would end up footing the bill for any sort of resilience work, not the companies themselves.
Oh, it could only happen, let's say, through a tax improvement, like a bid, where there's a tax. Rachel, you look like you're raising your hand.
Yes, I am, because I'm a professor. The point that I want to make is that the main way that a casino or a gambling operator can have a positive impact in a community is if the money that's being gambled at the casino is from out of the jurisdiction. So the money flows into the jurisdiction, the operator takes their profits or their cut, the government takes its tax revenue, and the locals get hired to work at the casino, not to gamble at the casino. And that's how you make it a, sort of a balanced proposition. It's, it's a really challenging business model if you have, all of your customers are locals. And any one of these gentlemen can probably speak to, the kinds of urban casinos that we've seen built over many years, where they market to locals, and it's the local communities that are feeding their money, their resources into that casino. And those resources are then leaving because they go to a multinational company. So, to the extent that a development or a casino attracts tourists from outside of New York City and hires people locally within the community, that would be a development that I would be more in favor of than some of the other ideas that have been thrown out.
Let me switch to, because I think what you're touching on, and you, Rachel, but all of you have touched on, is promises. So that the casinos can make a promise, but there's no one necessarily monitoring them or enforcing it. So have you seen any good examples? Like one person has asked the question, how about community benefit agreements? Have you seen any enforcement methods that actually have paid off?
I mean, I sit in Massachusetts, and we have a very strong independent regulator. And the Gaming Commission was stood up as an independent government agency. It doesn't it doesn't operate sort of within the political realm. But they, from the very beginning, I would have to say, and Tom, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but the Gaming Commission, since its earliest days, has really held the operators to a very high standard. They have diversity goals that the casino operators have to promise in public meetings that they're going to meet, and then they have to report on a quarterly basis whether they're meeting them or not. They have commitments to local hiring. They have commitments to spending with in-state vendors. And all of those numbers are reported on a quarterly basis to the Gaming Commission. I have to say that when sports betting was legalized in Massachusetts, they didn't quite go as far as the Expanded Gaming Act went. And so the sports betting operators are not being held to those same standards.
Wow.
But I am certainly encouraging the legislators that I talk to in Massachusetts to even level the playing field, so the sports betting operators have to do the same thing that our casino operators have to do here in Massachusetts.
Now, one of the people in the chat basically said money corrupts, and big money corrupts big time. So is there a particular worry based on, let's say, outside of New York State, so we're not accusing anyone, is there a particular worry about that in New York City, let's say, there, or just in general? Or is that sort of something that by now is so closely monitored that it's the casino is so hyper monitored an industry that that's less a concern than it would seem to be to the layperson?
Well, there's a saying in the gambling research field, or the people that I hang around with, that there was not a single U.S. jurisdiction that legalized casinos in the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s where some legislator that was involved in writing the legislation didn't end up going to jail because of some kind of corruption that was uncovered in the process of granting those licenses. So I wouldn't say that corruption is dead, but it certainly is something that policymakers hopefully are very aware of, and operators don't like to get their fingers caught in the door either.
Going back to promises, oh, go ahead, Thomas.
I was just going to mention too, and Rachel, if you recall or remember, in my recollection with the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, I mean, this was something that there was a lot of focus on, and even if there was any inkling of a questionable person that had some affiliation, they very closely monitored this to ensure that somebody that was involved in something corrupt wouldn't be part of any casino that could potentially get a license. So I think
there was at least one proposal that went down in flames because one of the investors in the land parcel that they were trying to put together had some iffy connections, and the Gaming Commission just said, nope, you're not going forward.
Just for sort of the audiences, I mean, casinos have this reputation for being connected to the mob, Vegas and Atlantic City and that. And remember that my sense of that is organized crime had illegal gambling parlors. And also when Las Vegas was first legalizing gambling was legal, but it was very difficult to collect on debts in court. You had people rough people up and, threaten them when they had gambling debts because you couldn't go to court. All you could do is scare them. You can now sue them for the gambling debts. And, organized crime in that sense doesn't give anything to a corporation that can very efficiently suck the money. I mean, you don't even have to worry about coins now. You just put a card in, the transaction is finished, the money is gone. You don't have to count it. So the model is different in that sense, I think.
There's no doubt that casinos put public policy under enormous pressure, and I think all of our remarks reflect that. And depending on the capacity of politicians and of public policy and of civil life in that area to resist or to negotiate, the casino outcome can be better or worse. I tend to be a little bit agnostic about casinos, not because I think they're amazing in all cases, but because I see them inevitably proliferating in the last 30 years. It seems inexorable, as I said. And so I emphasize that the more careful you can be about the initial locational decision, the better. They will inevitably grow. And both Detroit and Philadelphia put casinos in extremely sensitive urban locations. They negotiated about the form of the casino at that time, and then the casino mutated. And they've both paid the price. Philadelphia in terms of a waterfront that's blocked off by a casino. Detroit in terms of one of its few intact commercial areas that now has a gigantic megastructure that's proliferating with the attendant parking, et cetera. The other note is, because they mutate and its promises, you can't count on the form of the casino to remain. But if you can negotiate open space benefits and protect those are permanent benefits that can't be taken away, even if the casino goes out of business or changes form.
So one of the sites does not have a hotel associated with it?
It will later.
Okay. And one of the sites, same site, is very small. Doesn't provide much opportunity for expansion unless the raceway goes away. So
that will place pressure on the surrounds, because in 5 years or 7 years, when the business model changes, the casino's under pressure. The threat is, and it's similar with convention centers. Philadelphia's is a case in point, very sensitive location. Within 15 years of construction, it has to expand or it's going to go under. We have all these sunk costs. You must permit the expansion, and then the public policy is under pressure again, but this time with the sunk investment, and it tends to happen.
So we might expect the casino to start buying houses in the area with thoughts of expanding onto private property.
Or a kind of eminent domain hybrid type situation. I'm not saying that will happen, but if it's in that location, that's the kind of pressure you will experience later when the casino is under economic pressure, as it will be from the changing economy.
Now, one of the criteria that I spoke to that the state has is tourism. Now, uh, Rachel, you've been saying that most of the users are local residents.
That's true in the case of the Springfield and the Boston Encore Harbor
Hmm.
to a somewhat lesser extent. But you know, to let's be clear, the proposal in Boston for Encore Boston Harbor was they were going to build an international destination resort, that it was going to be sort of Macau style, and they were going to do international marketing. And somehow or other, that just never turned out to be the case. And instead, Encore Boston Harbor sends buses to Chinatown like many, many, many times a day, and ferries people from Chinatown over to their casino to gamble.
And it
How
has no
much of that,
transit access, making it harder for tourists to get there.
and is the transit access therefore for tourists because Chinatown in Boston is fairly central? Or is it for Chinese Americans or both? Greg?
Um, there is a stereotype that Asians like to gamble. Casino executives have told me Asians like to gamble. Asian American casino executives have told me Asians like to gamble. And as a result, casinos market to Asian and Asian American communities aggressively.
Got
And
it.
you'll see in the larger casinos or in casinos in cities that have Asian populations, separate gaming rooms, Chinese language games, different sorts of different types of games and different types of marketing and sort of interior, very stereotypical looking Chinese, like lots of red lantern neon facilities. So I imagine that that's who they're actively going after. And to Brent's point about sort of the effect on communities, Asian communities get, I'll say marketed too. You could also say targeted.
I want to ask a question about other unintended consequences. Because I'm sure casinos, they're marketing to certain groups, but on the other hand, they're not, it's not like they want to bankrupt people. They want people to be rich enough to keep gambling. So the one of the unintended consequences that was brought to my attention by George Jacomar, who I think is in the audience and is a transportation planner, is that higher accidents and fatalities are associated with casinos because a lot of people are driving inebriated, overly exuberant if they won, or intensely depressed if they lost. Is along that lines, are there impacts that we as New Yorkers or Yonkers need to think about offsetting that wouldn't be obvious? Think about that. So you're not bringing up any. So there are some, but they don't rise to the occasion of bringing them up in a panel discussion where we have limited time. Okay, fair enough. So,
I'll mention,
oh,
John,
go ahead,
about
Greg.
accidents, I would just say, New York State is not one of the municipalities where they can give you free drinks. A lot of places you can sort of get your New Orleans, they'll, bring you a cocktail at your slot machine. I also suspect that the profile of people who go to casinos is different than the average driver. They are by definition comfortable with a higher level of risk. I would suspect that the alcohol free or otherwise, and the fact that casino goers embrace risk probably accounts for the higher rates of accidents. They probably have higher rates of accidents wherever they drive. That would be my suspicion. Those two things. Sorry, go ahead.
So I'm going to go back into the fact sheets and then show the matrix that I didn't properly open the last time. And then I invite each of the speakers to respond to the fact sheets and or the matrix in their closing remarks. So first off, for the benefit of everyone who's attending, these fact sheets will be available, as I said, either both to the email list and will be on the website, the City Club website. And I want to point out that in addition to trying for the first time to systematically present for comparison all the features of each of the proposals, we've also added in the cons according to skeptics. What have opponents said about the site plan? So that's front and center for consideration. And Matt has taken a quick stab at what would be another way to approach this project, recognizing that the Gaming Authority is just about gaming and economic development and revenue creation. Are there ways to rethink these sites? Here, I can make that larger because I notice various people are trying to stare. Are there ways to make each of these sites and the projects somehow better by virtue of being part of a bigger story? So at Willett's point, there's a counter proposal for a park that would also deal with resiliency for the site. Could that be integrated? For the Aqueduct Raceway, there's the question of, could the casino, if in fact the raceway is leaving, what happens to the rest of that site? And could the casino help move that forward? I'm just mentioning one for each. We actually present various ideas because the point is not to settle, it's just to stimulate talk. For Bally's Bronx, we raise the question again of what if we tried to merge this with Brad's proposal? And for housing and park on the site instead of a golf course. And for MGM Yonkers, it's very constricted, and it's entirely blacktopped. So the question is there something that can be done here in terms of local flooding and or affordable housing on what remains of the site? So these are just some of the ideas. And as I said, we're going to be sharing these fact sheets. I invite everyone, particularly the panelists, to say, great idea, terrible idea. Have you thought about this? To the fact sheets. Likewise, the fact sheets feed into a matrix that's for internal purposes. We won't publish this because it's, I think, a little too easily made reductive. And the reason why I say that is who's to say traffic and fatality is more or less important than transport, than jobs, that tax revenues is more or less important than community benefits or political support. Each player is going to put different emphasis on each of these criteria. So these scores actually don't mean anything. And in fact, let me get rid of them. So, but we've added, by the way, in response, in live action, as we were talking, I added these two additional categories, largely in response to Brent's presentation. So, so I invite people to tell us that they think that what criteria they think we should employ. This is not to say that the City Club will take a position pro or against, just to say that we're looking at it and we're thinking about it. I mean, one of the issues is the timetable is very fast and it's not clear that we can have an impact on that decision since it's going to a gaming authority that only cares about the economic impact. So I invite each of the panelists to make a closing remark, maybe about what you would like to see done in the fact sheets or matrix, maybe not. So let's go in reverse order from how we opened up. So that would be Greg, Thomas, Brent, Rachel.
Thanks, John. Well, I gave some of my thoughts before, but I suppose I would conclude by pointing out that, as we've all been saying, casinos are not dramatic contributors. That particularly in an economy as large as New York, they are nobody's savior. And particularly with them on the margins of New York, I'm glad, as Brent was saying, from a design perspective, that they're there. But I don't think that they're going to be a central part of New York's economy, its identity, or its tourism. In terms of the cons, you raised some interesting points. The Hard Rock and Queens, if you wanted to use it for resilience, you might want to build in some requirements the way that they have for the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, whatever its virtues or faults may be, to require some of the construction address resiliency issues. Aqueduct, I think I have seen reports that there was talk about replacing the racetrack with housing. That's a good site. It is served well by transit. Whereas the Ballet site across the Whitestone Bridge, the idea of using that for parkland and housing, it's particularly poorly served by housing, and that's not going to change. Or by the time you built the subway line out there, it would be underwater. The Yonkers site is the most constrained, but there's talk in the alternative proposal about housing, and Yonkers is a nice, dense urban space. It's not a sprawling area. So there may be possibilities to do something there, but I don't think that the aqueduct or the Yonkers site are going to go away. So it's more a question of what you might be able to induce them to add, and maybe put an obstruction there to the sort of expansion that Brent's talking about.
Terrific. And I think, Thomas, you're next.
Yeah. So just some closing remarks on the fact sheets and the proposals.
Or anything else. You're not constrained.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would say, in some ways echoing Greg, I mean, I lived in New York City for several years, and I mean, I don't see casinos as being, located in the dense urban fabric is, a good idea. On the periphery, perhaps I think there's obviously some environmental, concerns and mitigation regarding sustainability that I think needs to be, put into the context. I also think, as I've been stating, again, I'm not somebody that's advocating for casinos. I don't, particularly think that they're a solution. I don't think that they, provide a number of the promises that they do put forth towards communities. But, they do kind of provide this space for groups to come to the table and negotiate, which I think, in the times that we're living in, they can do important things for, creating democratic processes, and people doing different types of negotiation at the community level. Maybe it's already happening, but maybe it happens in this other, enlightening way that is powerful. So I guess, I don't know, maybe I'll leave it at that. Well, actually, the one thing I will leave with is, I guess, just in looking at some of the fact sheets, I know you and Max are thinking through this, I think to really think about the complexities, at the neighborhood levels that you're looking at, to really, kind of go in depth as you're looking at some of these proposals, not just that, okay, there's a design of a casino, to really think about, the people that inhabit these places. I even think, as a sociologist, sometimes we kind of get away from that, I would just encourage that, and whatever goes forth, with however these proposals are studied, if a casino does come, to really center, the people that are in the vicinity of these places. So, yeah,
That's cool.
get that.
Brent, and then Rachel. And then Juan Rivero, do you want to hop on and close us out? Brent.
Thank you, John. I think in a perfect world, I wouldn't put a casino in New York City at all. But I wouldn't put the Cross Bronx Expressway there either. And I think New York has done a lot of things that, and I'm saying New York City has done a lot of things that seemed necessary at the time and were later deemed to be mistakes. Casino is probably something that in the fullness of time we'll say it was a mistake. That being said, the location that I favor far and above the others is the one adjacent to the former Shea Stadium, now whatever it's called, Citi Field, because it's accessible to transit. It's a location that you can really tap for community benefits, both for resilience, for housing, and for park space. And I know it's alienating parkland, but it's a parking lot, and it's been a parking lot for many decades. It's not about to become a park. But with the casino, you could leverage other parts of that park to be reconverted from asphalt. So I think the community benefits there are really, really positive, and it's not immediately adjacent to a community. So I would land with that one if we have to do it. And then in 30 years, I'll come back and say, see, it was a mistake.
So my closing remarks are, I want to thank everybody. As the daughter of an architect on one side and a city planner on the other side, I feel like I've learned a huge amount today, and my parents would be proud that I was on this panel. I do have to agree with Brent about the particular proposal that he favors. I favor it for those same reasons, but also because of the transit, presumably that site would be more accessible to tourists. And in order to have a positive impact, really the revenues that the casino brings in have to be from people from outside of New York City.
You know what? I'm sorry, Juan. I'm just going to ask one more question of our panelists.
We're out of time.
Well, there was a potential for 3 casinos. Just hold up your finger while Juan is talking about whether you think it should be 3, 2, or 1, or 0. Juan.
No fingers, Tom?
Yeah.
He's
One.
figuring out the signal for it depends.
Thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. Please note that we will be posting this video of the event on our YouTube channel, so you can do a screenshot of John's secretive matrix and adjust it as you see fit. If you enjoy this kind of discussion and haven't already done so, please subscribe to our newsletter so you can hear about future events. And if you want to support this kind of work, please consider a donation. Lastly, a huge thank you to all our panelists for what has been a great discussion, and to our friend and moderator, John Shapiro, as well as Rachel Margolin, Liam Blank, and Max Scott for their help in putting this together. And with that, I wish you all a very good night.
Thank you all and good night.
Good night. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Good evening.
Thanks, everyone.